Welcome to this episode of On Finding Peace, brought to you by Life's Journey Life Coaching. Our host, Chris Shea, is a counselor, nationally recognized speaker, and author on topics of guiding us to finding peace in our daily lives. Learn more about Chris Shea by visiting his website, www.lifesjourneyblog.com.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of On Finding Peace, and I'm very pleased to be joined today by my guest, Maggie Steele. And Maggie works with teenagers, is a life coach for teens, and is an author and trainer, and has a whole ton of stuff that you are. So welcome, and look forward to a good discussion on helping teenagers.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much for reaching out and wanting to connect in this way. It's a pleasure to be here. So thank you.
No, wonderful. When I saw that you were working with teenagers, and that's something that I'm here and there through high school work, and I have a few teens in my private practice, but most of my work has been with adults. So it's very interesting and fascinating for me to see that, someone is dedicating mindfulness, life coaching to teenagers. So, I think that's wonderful, and, it'd be great to hear about. So if you can maybe tell us a bit about yourself and what got you started on teenage work, we'll jump in from there.
Perfect. Okay. So I guess, I can start by saying that I myself struggled as an adolescent. I struggled with suicide thoughts on a regular basis. I had a really difficult period, probably from 15 to, I'd say 21 was really when I started to go through the healing process and find another way of being with myself, which was exactly what was the healing. Mindfulness is what supported me in that process. So that's how I come to this work from a place of, I've been there.
Okay.
I may not have the exact experience that you're having. And I know that there's another option. I know that there's another way of being with yourself, of being with your thoughts. And that saved me. And I feel very strongly that it can save other people.
Mm-hmm.
Suicide rates are nationally the second highest cause of death for youth ages 15 to 24. And, this is something I take very seriously, and I'm really passionate about this work. And I think that part of the reason that I'm so drawn to life coaching is because we're talking about the present. We're talking about here we are now, what's happening here, instead of going into what happened to you, and there can be a real, it's important to not negate that process. There's some real important work that goes on with looking at the past and how it shaped us. But I get really excited about, okay, so where are you now? And what is it that you want to do? Where do you want to go? Because in that place, we can look at, okay, these are the thoughts that you're having in this moment. And what does it look like to recognize them as just thoughts and see, okay, what is it you want in this moment? Instead of letting those thoughts govern you and say, yeah, I want it, but I can't have it. Yeah, it looks nice, but that's not possible.
Right. Trying to bring that notion that, what you don't think is possible if we just reframe our thoughts or change our perception.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And appreciate your sharing and, bringing your story with this, because, I think that makes a big difference when people are struggling, to know that somebody understands on that deeper level. Mm-hmm. How were you brought into the notion of mindfulness? It again, doesn't seem like a normal course of what happens in the world. People either, put you on drugs, take you to psychiatrists, things like that. But, to have found mindfulness, and that shift for yourself, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, thank you. No, I would say that my first introduction to mindfulness was actually through theater, through acting. And because I was so uncomfortable in my own body and my own thoughts, it was such a relief to get into another character.
Okay.
And part of what I learned as an actor, and I started to learn it around like 18, 19 at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, which was this idea that if you're in the moment with another actor, then it's going to be more realistic to the audience. You're not gonna miss anything that happens. So
Right.
I remember this acting teacher, Jackie Bartone. It was my first scene with this guy named Josh, and I came into the acting space, and the first line was, "How's your sandwich? How's the sandwich? How's the sandwich?" And and she cut me off every single time. She was like, "Get out, you missed it. Get out, you missed it. You missed the moment." And I had no idea what she was talking about.
Right.
And I was like panicking. I'm like, what am I doing wrong? And then I finally came in. I think it was like the 17th, the 18th time. And I was like, "How's the sandwich?" And he answered. And I felt like I was there with him. I got what he was saying, and I came back, and I was like, oh, okay. So I'm in the moment. I'm not in my head. I'm in the moment. I'm with him. And that was probably the first time that I ever thought of what that meant to be in the moment. And after probably a year or two later was when I decided to get support. And I worked with a therapist who had a background in mindfulness-based stress reduction. And we did some mindfulness work, and that was really the beginning of my healing process. But I always attribute acting because there was this piece of me that was like, wait, I can actually be in the moment with this other actor. And there's some real peace that comes with that. So, yeah.
So it all started with a sandwich.
It all started with a sandwich and Josh Crouch. Yeah.
There you go.
And being yelled at by Jackie Bartone. If she's listening, I love her. But, yeah.
We'll make sure this gets sent over to her for credit. But that's wonderful, because it's that stick-to-itness. It's that we're not just going to let something go, but we're going to do this, and not just for that perfection, but this is what we need. And you were missing that key component, and she kept you focused on that component.
Yes.
And that made the world a difference. So
it really did. I mean, I don't even know that I'm sure she doesn't. I never said this to her. But just how profound that experience. I mean, how many years later, am I still kind of thinking about that moment? And it's just, it's 18 years ago. So a simple little experience like that was actually able to support me in getting the help I needed.
Yeah. Well, which who knew at the time? That definitely wasn't her push and wasn't your thought.
No.
And yet over time, now here you are helping others refocus, that similar way. So how would you define what mindfulness means to you? On a lot of my broadcasts, I talk about mindfulness, and that is the main pitch of what I do. But from your perspective, how does mindfulness look for you?
For me, gosh, it is, I'd say, Peace in Schools, I am a mindfulness instructor with them. And we often say it's being here and now with kindness. So, I that resonates deeply with me. And I also, it's about bringing awareness to the present moment and with self-compassion, with acceptance of whatever is there is okay.
Right.
And without labeling it as good or bad or right or wrong, it is what it is. And can we simply just allow that to be? So that, I think, is kind of where I come from with the mindfulness practice.
Right. And I like that kindness piece. That's a different feature that when I've talked to other people or even in the readings that I've done, it's, I think, implied, but never really heard that vocalized, that this is, staying in the moment with kindness. And
because how often are we so hurtful and harmful to ourselves? It's like, we don't even pay attention to the things that we're saying to ourselves. If we did, I think we'd be really surprised if we were able to take our thoughts out and look at them and see what we're actually saying to ourselves. I think most of us would be like horrified that that's what's going on in the background every second. It's disturbing. And so it's really important to, I think, and part of what I attribute my healing to is bringing that compassion and kindness to those voices, those thoughts that you're having, and just not taking them as full-blown reality, like that is just a thought I'm having. That is not cement truth, I think that's key.
Oh, definitely, because self-talk gets us into most trouble. And, it's that self-talk where, like you say, if we really wrote all that down and to see what we accept as far as what we can say to ourselves, we would never say to another person. But it's okay to say that to ourselves. And that's part of what got me into the mindfulness was, my training in cognitive behavioral work, looking at those types of thought patterns and how do you shift the thought pattern, because that's really what is key to healing. But you have to be in that present moment. We have to kind of sit still with ourselves and, understand that. And I guess for me, in what work I've done with teenagers, how do you get them to sit still? Especially in today's day and age, they are so bombarded, just like all of us, but, they're more ingrained in that bombardment of the phones and the electronics and the notifications and that one of the things that I do right now with teenagers is, we go on retreats and we try to spend some quiet time, and they to sit still for like a half hour of just kind of quiet. It can't happen. We do our best. How do you work with that, with mindfulness?
Yeah. Well, again, I think it's the mindset and the approach of there's no right or wrong way to do this. So, it's, I think as adults, oftentimes we feel like, this is what needs to happen. It needs to look a certain way. And actually, if we're just flowing with whatever shows up and allowing it to be whatever it is, same thing with our mind, our thoughts,
True.
It can really just allow the adolescent it gives them this freedom, which at this particular developmental stage in their life is really important. It gives them this choice, right? And instead of giving them the specific, okay, you have to do it like this. This is what sit and another piece that I'll add is that little by little, expecting a lot in the first go round, it's overwhelming. I mean, for me, when I first started practicing mindfulness, that was overwhelming to sit for 20 minutes. Oh my gosh. So even just 3 minutes, what is it like to just be here with 3 minutes of silence, just noticing the breath, noticing when you're having a thought and coming back to the breath. Okay, great. So there's an organization called Inward Bound Mindfulness Education. It's a 5-day mindfulness retreat for teens. And I've been doing that with the teens for the past 3 years. And I mean, they sit for, gosh, I want to say like two, probably almost, yeah, I think it's about 7 or 8 sessions of 20 minutes a day.
Nice.
So that's a lot of silence, and there's silence in the dorms. So you
Interesting.
can imagine
Now,
it's
does silence
challenging.
mean no phones, no technology in that way of?
hmm So there's no phones at the retreat. So they give their phones in for the 5-day retreat.
Right.
It's kind of like, just this is an opportunity for you to just be with you and with your peers. So yeah, we ask that they turn in their phones, and in the dorms, it's like the idea is that if somebody wants to come in and just sleep or just be alone and write, that they're not going to be distracted by a lot of noise, and that sleeping is really the dorm is really there to rest or to sleep, but not to like socialize. And you can socialize outside of the dorm,
Right.
but it can be challenging at first. But by the end of the retreat, everybody's like, I don't know if I want to go back to the real world,
Exactly.
It's so, I don't know if I want my phone. God, it's, so I think to answer your question, it's just little by little, introducing little things and not attaching to any particular outcome that we want as adults,
Right.
which is hard. I mean, I notice myself as well. Like, I'll be like, oh, I kind of want them to experience this. It's like, well, they'll get what they get out of what I have to offer.
Right. Yeah. And I like that because the whole freedom and the choice, let them, guide that in that sense. But that is amazing though, that, they can find that sense of peace, where they don't want to leave. They don't want their phones. They don't want, like what they felt was necessary for life. Now they realize isn't necessary for life. And the difference.
It's an amazing, it's an amazing experience to witness. And yeah, if anyone's interested in looking up that organization, Inward Bound Mindfulness Education, IBME, and then the organization that I teach mindfulness at, a high school, Franklin High School here in Portland, Oregon, is part of Peace in Schools, which is the first organization to offer 4-credit mindfulness classes in the nation. So instead of physical education, for example, students can choose mindful studies.
Nice.
So it's both of those are pretty incredible. I feel very, very grateful to be a part of both of those organizations.
What does mindfulness studies cover?
Mindful studies covers a lot. So it's a 30-week, it's a semester long program. So we get to work with students, some 3 days a week or 2 or 3 days a week. It depends. But, it covers everything from, learning how to focus the attention on the breath, the body, sounds. We talk about the conditioned mind. We talk about self-talk and we cover so many things. Loving kindness, understanding what it's like to cultivate self-compassion, compassion for others. We cover quite a bit.
Nice. And is this something that they can choose to do, or is this part of their curriculum?
Yeah, so it's an elective, and it's a 4-credit elective. So instead of, for example, physical education or another option, they can choose mindful studies for a semester. It's a semester long, and we do mindful movement for a portion of the class, and then mindful studies, which is what I just shared.
Yeah, no, that's really excellent. And is this information on our website? I'm thinking that others, might be listening and say, hey, can we bring it to our school system or our school? Like, what do we do? Because this sounds awesome.
Absolutely. So peaceinschools.org. is where you would go. And IB.me is national, so there are retreats on the East Coast and the West Coast, and in some areas in the Midwest.
Right. No, that
IB.org or .info. I think it's IBme.info.
We can try that. Cool.
Yeah.
No, that to get kid in there, because when I'm thinking with teenagers, to help them through all of their life struggles, if they can learn these techniques, how much better their early adulthood is going to be. That as they can spread that to others, I'm sure it leads someone into their family life and just really change things. How do you see teenagers, taking this? I mean, do they seem receptive to something like a mindfulness, or is it totally bizarre to them, or both?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's both. It depends on the teen, and I don't want to speak for all teens everywhere that I've worked with, but I will say that there are so many that basically say that it has changed their life. And I'm not saying that lightly. Like,
right.
I'm being very honest with those words. Like, we have a video of a student right now on the Peace in Schools website that shared her story, and she really does say that it has changed her life. I know what it did for me as a young adult. And, I think the reason I'm here is because of what I learned to do, and how I learned to practice. So I think what we're doing is a really big deal. And I mentioned the suicide rates earlier. This is an opportunity to support our youth, give them tools that they can use, no matter their socioeconomic status. This is not about needing to pay for any service. This is, you have everything you need.
Right.
All you have to do is learn some tools on how to focus the attention and notice thoughts. And the impact has been pretty huge.
Mm-hmm. Are there statistics on this yet that show, proper behaviors versus suicide rates, or, kids getting in trouble or things like that? Has any of that been studied yet, or is it still, the anecdotal that, we know it works, we keep doing this?
Well, we do know, because of brain scans and research around the change in the gray matter of the brain, that mindfulness does, and practicing meditation does impact us in a positive way. We definitely know that in the developing brain of the adolescent, it does support emotional regulation. And because the prefrontal cortex hasn't been fully developed, that's a really important piece. Yep. But as far as suicide ideation, because that's a key piece of my interest with this, and I think it supported me in thinking differently around that. I know there's been research around veterans who practiced mindfulness and had suicide ideation, and that there was a shift there that took place. But in adolescents, I'm not aware of any research studies that have happened as of yet. There may be. I'm not aware of them.
Yeah. And to me, whether the research is there or not, I'm all for this, and wish this would spread all around. Mindfulness does work, and it is life-changing, and it's something that leads people to find. And for teenagers in this tumultuous times, that's what they're looking for, is how can I find something in my own life. I think this gives them a way to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And another piece that I think is really important, you know, I work with teens individually with my life coaching practice,
Mhm.
and we incorporate mindfulness in those interactions. But I really do think that there's a lot of value that comes from group work and having other teens connect with in an authentic way,
Mhm.
and that takes time, you know, building trust um, but I think that there is something really important that happens and unfolds in a group setting, because I know for me specifically, you know, I felt as I was in isolation. I didn't feel like anyone else was going through what I was experiencing. And that was part of the reason that I felt like suicide was the only option. I felt like I was so not where I was supposed to
Mhm.
be mentally, and that something was really fundamentally wrong with me. And what we see in the group setting is that suddenly it's like people are connecting and hearing one another and sharing their stories, and there's this understanding that, whoa, I'm not alone.
Mhm.
I actually have people in my class that are maybe not struggling in the exact same way I'm struggling, but they're struggling, and
Yeah.
there's pain there, and that that connection is critical, I
Yeah.
think, to healing.
Oh, most definitely. I've worked for a few decades now with addictions, and you see group work and, you know, the self-help groups. That's what makes it work. You know, is you don't have to
Mhm.
have experienced exactly what, you know, each other has, but the fact that everyone in that group understands makes a world of difference. You know, I'm not alone. Others out there get it, and we can join
Mm.
in that. And teenagers generally tend to, like we like to say, you know, like run in packs. You know, they're in
Yeah,
groups. You know,
that's
so yeah, to bring them together. And the other thing that, you know, I found working with teenagers is a lot of times they hold all of this in. You know, and it's hard to realize what suffering they are going through. And with some of the teens, you know, that I would see on a daily basis, and, you know, they seem like, you know, life is wonderful. And then they start telling you about their family life and their own struggles and what's going on. And you're like, whoa, you know, like, who would have ever thought you were going through all this?
yeah.
Because they're roaming around like life is great.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and I think that that's really important that you even mention that, is because, you know, I I remember 14, there were people that nicknamed me Sunshine in school, and
Mhm.
I was contemplating suicide at that time. You know, there's no way to really know what someone is going through just by how they behave. And
Mhm.
I think that that's such an important piece to understand if we're going to support adolescents and prevent suicide. Like,
Yeah.
we can't just be looking for signs. You know, there may not be the ideal, you know, red flags or things that
Mhm.
we think makes them at risk. You know, it
Right.
could be, yeah,
Yeah.
they could just be flying under the radar.
Yeah. You know, and doing this by themselves, you know, which,
Mhm.
you know, when you look at things like this mindfulness, and you know, just off the top of my head, when I hear, you know, with this, you know, Peace in Schools initiative, because, you know, that to me would be, how do you get a teenager to come out of themselves, to share, you know, what they're struggling with and what's going on, instead of just roaming around like, you know, hey, life is wonderful, and that's the persona I'm going to show you.
Mhm.
They have a means, you know, by, well, I'm going to take this elective, and you know,
Mhm.
this way I can maybe learn something, and come out of myself. Um, and it's an easy way, because, you know, the other students could say something and say, yeah, I just didn't want to take gym, you know, so I'm just going to do this. I'm out. Um, but besides that, how do you find teenagers to be able to, you know, how would you tell other adults, you know, how do you get teenagers to get the help that they need?
Yeah. So, do you mean in my individual practice, or in school?
Yeah, in general, I mean, generally speaking, and if it's, examples with your own practice or within the school, because, I'm thinking, when you see these teenagers who are roaming around, who seem like everything's put together, and life is great, but there is that inner, what would we as the adults who's looking at this teenager who seems everything is great, how do we find out what's going on and get them into like a mindfulness and just something that would help them to not have to do this alone or not have to put on this happy face persona?
Yeah. Beautiful question. I think that one of the most important things that you can do as an adult is, and research supports this as well, is to engage and listen, ask questions, without, so for those of you listening that aren't trained as life coaches, you may not have an understanding of reflective listening or what that entails. And oftentimes what happens is that adults, when they interact with teens, they're coming from a place of, I know best for you, or I have something to offer you. And it's coming from a place of deep care and compassion. And what that does is it shuts down the teen. It makes it so that there's a right and a wrong. They're wrong, you're right, and you have the answers, they don't. And it will put up a wall. If there was a wall already, it will make the wall even thicker. If there wasn't a wall, there up goes the wall. So really what I would encourage you to do is to practice asking questions and reflecting back what you're hearing without giving your insight, without giving your thoughts to the teen. It gives them an opportunity to feel heard. It gives them an opportunity to be seen, to be understood. And that little by little will allow them to open up to you. If you come at it as, I've got this great program for you, this is what you need, again, you're coming at it in a way that says, you're bad, you're wrong, you're broken, you need to be fixed. And that's not going to offer the teen an opportunity to feel comfortable enough or safe enough to share with you what they're having. In fact, it's feeding, without you maybe even knowing, it's feeding the negative self-talk that's saying something's wrong with me.
True, because we're putting that out there, and that's great advice, and I can appreciate you sharing that, because what we try to do is give out some practical tips, and a lot of people listening to this aren't the professionals, and might work with teens or have teens, and to know, just to be open to listen, to ask for their advice and opinions, and I guess treat them like people. That they're not, 5-year-olds that don't have a clue. I mean, they have a clue, Oh,
they have yeah. I mean, all of my coaching clients, that's kind of the main thing that they underline at the end of our time together, that they felt like they really were able to get clear about who they are just by me holding up the mirror, essentially. A lot of people think that life coaches are there to advise and tell their clients what to do. And that's really a misconception. That's not what we do. We trust that the client is naturally resilient, creative, whole, resourceful, and that they have the answers. And I do that with my teens. I trust that they know what their strengths are. All I'm doing is shining a light to help them get clear about what those strengths are, how they can leverage them, so that they can move forward and cultivate a life and connections with others that they feel good about.
Yeah, definitely. And I've always looked at it where I'm the guide.
Yes.
I don't know another person as well as the other person would know themselves. So
Absolutely.
I can be objective. I mean, that's a bonus, but yeah, all I can guide you, and what I really like in the work that I've done with teenagers and, is their insights. They do have insight into what's happening around them and their families and their friends. more so than I think we ever give them credit for understanding.
Oh.
They may not always know what to do with it. There might be some confusion next steps, but their insight into what's happening and what they would like to see, it's tremendous what they have. And I wonder where we as adults lose some of that. I think they have that better than we do at times.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we could speculate that that's, it's part of the conditioning, that we, after experience after experience after experience, teaches us, oh, well, you got to be careful, or, oh, yep, that's a little bit too risky. Whereas adolescents are in this developmental stage where it's like, let me try that. What's that? Let me explore that.
Yep.
And, I mean, there's so much going on right now around conversations, brain scientists, and people that are interested in kind of restructuring our education system to support and kind of nurture the adolescent brain at this stage in development, instead of it being what it's been for years, which is, algebra, science, history, instead of like creating a new way to support this like really vibrant and incredible time that's happening neurologically.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. This is where they're forming things, and like I say, once we, show them and demonstrate over and over what they're not supposed to be forming, then they'll stop forming it, and move on. But it is great to see some of that thought process. And, a few times I've talked to different teens after they've done something, and, you can really look at it and say like, well, that was really dumb. And not that I would say that to them, but I'm thinking like, that was really dumb. Why would you do that? But, when I would ask them, like, what were you thinking when you did whatever it was? And a few times they'll look at me and go, I'm a teenager. I'm supposed to do stuff like this. And that kind of hits me, is there is kind of that understanding. I'm supposed to, experiment. I'm supposed to try this stuff, like I'm a teenager. What did you expect me to do?
Yeah. And I really think that oftentimes adults, because physically adolescents can often resemble a young adult, I think that parents and adults often, the expectations are a lot higher than an adolescent is able to meet because of the developmental stage of their brain, that we forget that the part of their brain, the prefrontal cortex, that is able to rationalize and think things through and look at the outcome and potential possibilities of things happening in the future isn't fully developed. And I know for me, looking back, there are two specific situations as an adolescent that I am still just absolutely blown away that I didn't realize at the time that was unethical or bad, or that there would be a potentially bad outcome. I remember myself in both situations going for instant gratification. Literally, I was just like, like, that's not a bad. And I know that my brain, like, it just wasn't, it wasn't making sense to me that was not a smart thing to do.
Right. Yeah. And brain science has taken us, places in that sense of understanding it better, and I think it's important. And I really wish there was some way to get more parents to understand that, until they're almost mid-20s, you don't have a fully formed prefrontal cortex. And, they are going to do stupid things, or you're going to get answers like, I didn't think, because they can't think it through. Hopefully we do. And I think that is that, where you look at them and say, but I would have thought that through. Why didn't you think that through? Well, your prefrontal is already formed. Theirs isn't.
Yeah.
So I hope you would have thought that through as an adult, but, and that's not to, let them get away with stuff. I mean, those are learning times, but yeah,
absolutely,
to really, put that on them that you should have, when they just, whether they would try or not, they can't. It's just not there. So
Yeah. And I appreciate you mentioning, yeah, it's not it doesn't mean that we can't have conversations around
mhm,
looking at what happened and seeing how you feel now and what could you have done differently. I mean, those are really, really
yeah,
helpful conversations for adolescents because
right.
in retrospect they're able to see, oh, okay, so that caused me a lot of pain.
Mhm.
What could I have done differently? What strength could I have like, if we're using the example, like leveraged, um and how could that have helped me
Right.
have a different outcome?
Yeah.
Those are really powerful conversations to
Oh yeah.
have.
And like what you were talking about earlier, I think that's what helps the teen to have that trust with the adult. If we can have that conversation versus saying, well, you should have, and then, here's your punishment, to really talk that through,
Right.
that should probably help, so that if the teenager finds themselves in trouble or feeling suicidal or feeling, hopeless or whatever it may be, you know, you would hope they could go to that person and say, here's what I'm feeling, without,
Yeah.
knowing, they're not going to be judged by that. They're not going to be, told whatever. And, but it'll be taken seriously and kindly and with compassion.
Hmm. Yeah. And I really do think that there's such a stigma around mental health issues and challenges in our society
Mhm.
that it can be really scary to come forward and say that, especially if you know someone that's been um, hospitalized and they told you the story of what that was like
Right.
for them. And, you know, there, the, it's, it comes with a lot. And I think it's really important that we start talking more openly
Hmm.
about mental illness and suicidal thoughts
Yeah.
and, things like
Well,
that.
I totally agree, because it's really, for me, heartbreaking when I hear a teenager come and say, I think my friend is suicidal, but I don't want them in trouble, or I don't want to get in trouble.
Mm.
That they're associating, this condition with punishment,
Yeah.
versus, this is what somebody's going through. What can we do to help them? They're viewing it as punishment. And we need to get rid of
Yeah.
that can't be viewed that way.
No. No. And I mean, it's the same thing. I know you said you work with addictive behaviors, and I feel like, there is this kind of mindset that, addiction is bad.
Hmm.
It's almost like addiction and criminality are just
Yeah,
like hand in hand.
exactly.
And it's like it's so frustrating to me
Hmm.
because I mean what we know about addiction is that it's often because of other underlying
Exactly.
behaviors and challenges and experiences that addiction is kind of like what happened because of it's the coping
Hmm.
mechanism that turned into potentially
Yeah.
an illness. I don't know. That's not my area of expertise. I could
Oh
be
no, you're
off.
you're on,
But
and your premise though is 100% true in that, you're dealing with, addiction as mental illness. And it's unfortunate that in, this century we can still look at an addiction as a moral failing, and we
Mhm.
can create the criminals out of addicts, versus, you wouldn't think anymore of doing that with any other mental illness, and we used to, I mean, go back in the early histories of how you treated people with certain mental illnesses, and locked them up or put them away and didn't treat them well. And yet we're still doing that with a segment of the population. Um, yeah. Don't have
Yeah.
an answer for that yet, but you're right on with that. And to see that attitude put over to teenagers when it comes to suicide is just not good, because they're not going to come forward if they think they're going to get in trouble. If they think they're going to
Yeah.
get punished, they're not going to come forward. And if they don't come forward, well, you gave the stats, and that's what happens when you don't come
Yeah.
forward. So now, when
Yeah.
you look at, this piece in the schools and these retreats that you're doing, and, the outings, Is there a component for the family? I mean, where do we help the family to understand? Because, the kids can go back after these 5 days, hey, this is great. And here's what I learned. I feel so good about me. And you could run up into your parent that goes, yeah, well, that was a bunch of whatever. And, is there a family component to any of this stuff?
Yeah, that's such an important point. So at the end of the 5-day retreat with IB Me, one of the teachers meets with all the parents if they want to come early on the day that they pick up. It's a choice, and if they want to sit, and they basically give them a kind of debrief of what they've just gone through for 5 days, and what that might feel like and what that looks like, and so that's a really beautiful piece to the retreat. With Peace in Schools, we're not there yet. And I think that that's definitely on our radar. Training for educators is something that we're doing, for counselors, for those that support youth in those settings. But for parents, we do offer workshops in Oregon for parents of teens. I'm sorry, we're doing an upcoming one very soon. I don't have the dates on me, but yes, so we do that. Okay. So there are some parental components. I feel like that's a really, really important piece. And I mean, when we talk about family systems, it's like you can't just focus in on one person and not look at, the whole family dynamic. And I mean, for me, with my coaching, I always connect with the parent after a session, but via email, not giving specific details about what we focused on due to confidentiality reasons, but I give them an idea of a suggestion of how they could support their teen that week. And I think that that's another way that you can kind of connect the pieces.
Oh, definitely. Because, and I like that, how can you support your teen? Because that's really the nexus of that question, that, you get these teenagers who are learning so much about themselves and that kindness to self and the compassion and, everything that's positive mindfulness. And then if it, they keep hitting the brick wall when they go home, you wonder how much to keep that, going, where if there was at least some understanding where even the parent doesn't have to buy into it necessarily, but at least enough understanding to listen to the, to their child so that, it can keep reinforcing, and the person can still do what they're doing. So that's excellent, to have some sort of follow-up.
Yeah. And there may be situations, and I have had many situations where the caretaker, the parent, just isn't on board with the work that the teen is doing. And in that case, it's just another learning opportunity for the teen of like, how can you respond to this situation? What tools do you have to ensure that you feel good, you feel safe, and you can keep moving toward in the direction that you want to move in? And that happens a lot, that comes up in our sessions. And it's just another opportunity to go, okay, so this is what I'm faced with, and what can I do? Instead of, depending on the person in your life to be on board or support you in a way that you want to be supported, because realistically, we can't change other people. We can't make people the way that we want them to be.
And it's unfortunate it would be from the parent, but it would be the lesson, because in the future, you're not always going to run across people who are going to be supportive, so you're preparing them for the future in an unfortunate circumstance, but still, but a good life lesson with that. So, for, I guess some parting words of wisdom, what would you say to sum some of this stuff up as all that we've taught?
Yeah. I feel like, to sum it all up, I think it's really important to hold space for one another's experience. And, to not put each other in boxes or label each other. I think it's easy to do that when you are trying to help someone. And if that person is your child or your student, and, instead, I would invite people to hold space for that person's experience and to simply just reflect back what you're hearing. I think that alone can really offer more support than anything that you advise or tell them to do.
Nice. Yeah. That's words of wisdom for all of us.
Not always easy to do, but I do think that there's a lot of good that can come out of it.
And I totally agree. Nobody said life was going to be easy, but, especially in the dealings that I've had with teenagers, one of the things that I do love is even the ones who are really suffering with whatever's going on in their family, they find happiness somewhere. They find hope somewhere. And, in a lot of cases, they don't let that whole thing bring them down. And that's something that I have to remember, is that there is good. And we just have to keep looking for that. We can find it. So what's the best way for people to get in touch with you if they want to learn more about you and what you do? How's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, I guess that you can email me. So it's Maggie, Maggie, at thelifecoachforteens.com.
Great.
So yeah, and you can check out my website, thelifecoachforteens.com. And yeah, I look forward to hearing from anyone and supporting anyone that needs some help or support on the way.
Perfect.
So,
and you do your life coaching online, I see on the website. So people don't have to be in Portland, right?
Yes, I do in person in Portland and via FaceTime, Skype, and all sorts of techie ways all over the States. So yes, I can meet you online.
Perfect. Just opening up the base for you. So,
yeah, thank you.
Excellent.
All right.
I really appreciate your time and the wisdom you share. And, hopefully this is something that can help change somebody's life. And maybe we can get people in other areas around the country, and really help more teenagers. I appreciate all your sharing and everything that you're doing.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode with Chris Shea. Learn more about Chris Shea by visiting his website, www.lifesjourneyblog.com.